of African descent in the United States. These hearings are a process by which witnesses can present accounts of unjustified killings and maimings of Black individuals by police officers in the United States before an international panel of human rights experts. We now begin the hearing in the case of Tashii Farmer. My name is Marjorie Cohn, and I am the rapporteur for this hearing. Presiding over this hearing are Commissioners Mireille Fanon-Mendes-France of France and Commissioner Sir Clare Roberts of Antigua and Barbuda. The witness in the hearing is Andre Lagomarsino. There will be 50 minutes for this hearing. The witnesses will testify, followed by a period of questions from the commissioners. I will call time at the 30-minute mark and the 45-minute mark. Please excuse my interruptions. Commissioners Mendes-France and Roberts, I now present to you the first witness, Andre Lagomarsino. Andre Lagomarsino, please confirm your name.
My name is Andre Lagomarsino.
Do you promise that your testimony to the Commission of Inquiry will be true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
I do, yes.
You may begin.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. My name is Andre Lagomarsino. I'm an attorney in Las Vegas, Nevada, USA. I've been a practicing attorney for 22 years and handle civil rights matters here in Las Vegas, Nevada. I've handled approximately 20 cases against the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. 4 noteworthy cases include the case of Trevon Cole, an unarmed Black man who was emptying marijuana when he was killed by Brian Yant with an AR-15. Trevon Cole was dumping a bag of marijuana into a toilet and was unarmed when Detective Yant killed him in 2010. I handled the case of Stanley Gibson and represented his mother. Stanley was an African-American man, a United States veteran who was pinned in his car when he was killed by Jesus Arevalo, who shot him with an AR-15. Stanley was also unarmed. In the case today, I represent the mother of Tashii Farmer. Tashii Farmer was unarmed when he was tased, beaten, and choked to death by Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department Officer Ken LaPera. Today I have some prepared remarks that I'd like to read, as well as some video that I'd like to show. The video will be a 6-minute video showing the actual incident, followed by later in the presentation a 1-minute video describing some of the national news coverage that this case received. Before I proceed, does anybody have any questions? Thank you. Tashii Farmer was just 40 years old when he was choked to death by former Las Vegas police officer Ken LaPera, at the same time that 3 other Las Vegas police officers, Crumrine, Tran, and Flores, held Tashii down. The Clark County coroner gave an opinion that Tashii died as a result of police restraint procedures, and a nationally renowned medical expert, William Smock, that's S-M-O-C-K, concurred that the cause of Tashii's death was by asphyxiation. Tashii was unarmed and, according to every witness in this case, did nothing to harm anyone before being killed. Officer LaPera, the officer that killed Tashii, claims that he used a department-authorized procedure called a lateral vascular neck restraint, which we will call LVNR today, against Tashii. LaPera used the LVNR on Tashii even after Tashii became unconscious. He used the chokehold for about 1 minute and 12 seconds, and that is demonstrated by the video. The LVNR is a neck restraint chokehold where the officer squeezes the sides of the subject's neck with his encircling arm in an effort to make the subject pass out by cutting off blood and therefore oxygen to the brain. Crumrine, Flores, and Tran believed Lopera was utilizing an LVNR to restrain Tashii as well. This is important because all of the officers were trained that the LVNR can be deadly if it is applied to a subject after he becomes unconscious. It is part of the training. Even the police department's own subject matter experts testified in the case that I handled that if the subject of the restraint becomes unconscious, they should be immediately released. Yet the three other officers assisted Lopera to choke Tashii well after it was obvious that Tashii was unconscious. The police department in Las Vegas has had existing problems with numerous improper applications of the LVNR. Other individuals have died while in a neck restraint administered by Las Vegas police officers. Las Vegas Police provides only 1/2 of the recommended annual training for the restraint. In other words, this restraint is trained across the country. Many different police departments ban this restraint, but those that do require but those that allow the restraint require 4 hours of annual training for the restraint. The police department here only provides 2 hours intentionally. When Tashii Farmer was killed, the police department allowed this deadly force option to be utilized against subjects who presented no threat to officers or others in low-level force situations. Since the death of Tashii Farmer, and because of the death of Tashii Farmer, the police department has changed the policy to allow it only when there is a threat of substantial bodily harm to the officers. But it is too late for Tashii and Trinita Farmer, Tashii's mother, who I represent. Our civil case here was involving Trinita Farmer's relationship with her son. Trinita Farmer was very close with her son Tashii and lived with him at the time of his death. She brought a lawsuit under 42 U.S. Section U.S. Code 1983 based on the 14th Amendment for deprivation of her substantive due process right to a family relationship with Tashii. The Ninth Circuit, where Nevada is located, recognizes that parents of an adult child possess a constitutional claim as to police mistreatment of that child. She sued Officer Lopera. She sued the other 3 officers, Crumrine, Tran, and Flores, for their failure to intervene, and she sued the police department. The case is currently pending. However, the defendants have brought numerous motions to dismiss the case, and the judge currently in the case has dismissed the claims against the 3 non-intervening officers under the doctrine of qualified immunity. The case proceeds against the police department for their failure to train and against Officer Lopera. In the lawsuit, the following facts were uncovered. Lopera's conduct included using a taser on Tashii 7 times. After tasing Tashii, Lopera punched Tashii in the head a total of 10 to 12 times. Lopera then choked Tashii to death for 1 minute and 10 to 12 seconds. The testimony revealed that the officers who did not intervene admit that they could have physically intervened to stop Lopera from choking Tashii to death, but they chose not to do so. There was ample time for them to deliberate, 48 seconds of watching an unconscious Tashii in a deadly chokehold, and yet they did nothing other than tell Lopera to release, but took no physical action to do so, even though they were trained. They had a responsibility to act physically if Lopera refused commands, which he did. As to the Las Vegas Police Department's policies, the department had a policy in place at the time of Tashii Farmer's killing that allowed for the deadly LVNR to be used in low-level force situations where neither the officer nor anyone else was presented with a threat of injury. Second, the police department admittedly undertrained its officers. As mentioned before, 4 hours of annual training are required, but the police department provided only 2 hours of annual training. Third, and just as importantly, we contend, the police department did not adequately punish officers who excessively used chokeholds or other uses of force. And fourth, the police department was aware that the chokehold was an ineffective use of force, including as the cause of prior injuries of deaths, but was deliberately indifferent. Now, before I put the specific details of this case on the record, I think it's important for the commission to watch a 6-minute video that shows what happened on the night that Tashii was killed by the police officers. The video is comprised of two types of footage. First is going to be casino surveillance footage. This incident happened, started inside of the Venetian Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas, Nevada, and finished outside in a driveway. So there is casino surveillance footage, but there is also body camera footage that was from a camera worn by Lopera. Okay. If I can have your indulgence for just one moment, I'll share the screen here. Over here. All right, now this is inside the Venetian Casino. Those are the two police officers walking into the food court. They encounter Tashii Farmer, also known as Tashii Brown, inside the food court. He told the officers he felt like he was being followed, so they started to talk with him. The interaction lasted about 45 seconds. As I'll describe later, the other officer who was involved, Officer Liff, who did not participate in the use of force, testified that Tashii Farmer had done nothing wrong and did not appear suspicious. Now this is Officer Liff to the right of Officer Lopera, and you'll see Officer Lopera will shortly hand his coffee over to Officer Liff. This is Tashii Farmer. Now on the body camera footage, the first 30 seconds of the footage is without sound. Then after 30 seconds, there is sound. Officer Lopera was chasing Tashii Farmer down a hallway, an exit hallway, and he fell in some water. That is Lopera calling out for his partner, Officer Liff.
Is somebody running?
This is where he approaches Tashii Farmer.
Stop, don't move! Yeah, Taser! Taser! Don't move! Don't move! Stop right there! Get your stomach! Get your stomach! I will! Control me, so I won't give you rent. Don't move, man! Go on your stomach! Please! Get on your stomach! Get on your stomach! Get on your stomach! Is he out? Is he out yet?
Let him go, Ken.
Sure?
Yep.
Roll him to, hold on! Don't grab my fucking leg! Roll him to the other side. Get the other arm too. You got the little one?
Yeah, I got it. Somebody grab his left arm.
Come, stand by. Got to carjack somebody. Move, move. Thank you. I tased him. Roll medical.
Okay, bear with me here. On May 14, 2017, Tashii Farmer entered the Venetian Hotel on the moving walkway from outside the building on Las Vegas Boulevard. Tashii walked past numerous other people, held the door open for another man who was carrying luggage, and kept to himself. As he continued to walk through the property, Tashii never made physical contact or verbal contact with anyone else except for having held the door open for the gentleman. Tashii was appropriately dressed for the time of year, May, wearing blue jeans and t-shirt as he carried his hat in his hand while walking through the property. He did not know that his life would end that night. The next day was Mother's Day, and Trinita, my client, was notified by the Clark County coroner on Mother's Day that her son was killed by the police officers. At the same time that Tashii was walking through the Venetian, Metro Officer Ashley Liff and former Metro Officer LaPera were drinking coffee together at the Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf. It was so hot outside that Officer Liff purchased iced coffees for herself and LaPera because she was sweating. Officer Liff ran the air conditioning in her car because it was so hot. Why I mention that is because Officer LaPera claims that because Tashii Farmer appeared to be sweating, that was his basis for trying to detain him, sweating in Las Vegas in May. Officer Liff had been LaPera's partner for a few months and had been partnered with LaPera for around 10 different night shifts before this incident occurred. Liff, who cried in her actual deposition testimony about the case, testified that LaPera would get amped up and loud during something as simple as a traffic stop, making the citizens subjected to his actions extremely uncomfortable. One of LaPera's weaknesses was his difficulty staying calm during a citizen stop. That night, Liff and LaPera were members of the Flex team. This is a saturation team where the officers wear something called BDUs, which is short for battle dress uniforms, not the traditional tan uniform that Las Vegas police officers typically wear. The Flex team considers itself to be proactive in that it targets and goes after individuals. The Flex team is not required to answer other calls for service. The officers left the Coffee Bean with their iced coffees, and at the same time, about 8 minutes after he entered the property, Tashii was near the food court and he encountered the officers. They spoke, as you can see from the video, for about 45 seconds before they walked away from Tashii and spoke to each other alone. was no reasonable suspicion for the officers to detain Tashii. During that entire time that Liff and Lopera were standing next to each other, Lopera never said to Liff that he was going to detain Tashii. He never told his partner. He just reached out to grab him. As you can see, Tashii stepped back and jogged away from Lopera through a door with a bright red and well-lit exit sign. Officer Liff did not feel that Tashii was under the influence of narcotics. She felt that Tashii was sweating due to being outside before coming inside. She did not observe Tashii to be sweating enough to show through his clothing. Nor did Liff believe that there was anything unusual about the way Tashii was speaking. He did not appear to be mentally ill, nor did Liff appear to be in a mental crisis during their interaction. According to Officer Liff, Tashii did not seem paranoid and did not strike Liff as behaving in an unusual way. Tashii did not meet any of the criteria that would qualify him as being a danger to himself or others. According to Officer Liff, as she wept during the deposition, she stated the event was shocking because of everything that had happened and it shouldn't have happened, in her words. Senior officers and other investigators likewise testified that Lopera had no basis to arrest Tashii. He was never a threat to the public. Even the Chief McGrath testified that the video does not show any behavior that justified a decision to try to apprehend Tashii. At one of Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department's press briefings after this incident, the Undersheriff Kevin McMahill publicly stated that Tashii Farmer would not have been charged with the crime had he lived. Now, Lopera claimed that he believed that Tashii was trying to carjack that truck that we saw in the video, but every other police officer who viewed that video stated that they did not believe that Tashii was trying to open the tailgate. Even the driver of the vehicle testified that he did not believe that Tashii was trying to in any way take his vehicle from him or assault him. But, and this is an interesting tidbit about this case, you may have heard me mention the case of Brian Yant, who shot Trevon Cole earlier when I started my remarks. Brian Yant had been involved in 3 officer-involved shootings of unarmed individuals, 2 of which were of African descent. After his 3rd shooting, he was made the police union representative who advises individuals involved in officer-involved deaths after incidents. And he was recorded in the car telling Ken Lopera into his ear, whispering, when he was in the car, that's when you went into apprehension. It is undisputed that Farmer was never in any vehicle. As to the taser, a yellow and orange label on Lopera's taser warned that its use can cause death. The police department's own policy states that an officer can only tase or use a taser against an individual 3 times. In this case, Tashii was tased 7 times. The officers who reviewed this case for the department concluded that Lopera improperly used his taser. Lopera's county-appointed lawyers, both in the criminal and civil case, argued that Lopera was justified in using the taser because Tashii was not following commands. This argument is completely contradicted by the audio and video evidence, as well as the testimony of numerous other officers. The video evidence reveals that Lopera did not give a warning and gave confusing commands such as stop, don't move, you're getting tased. Lopera kept screaming conflicting instructions such as don't move, but in the next breath yelling, get on your stomach. The detectives who investigated stated under oath that it was impossible for Tashii to follow these commands. As a result of the taser use, Tashii went into neuromuscular incapacitation multiple times during the time he was being tased and being given conflicting commands. Tashii can be heard crying out in pain at the time he's being tased. There were literally metal hooks that were charged with electricity that were dug into his back. Even during the times that he wasn't incapacitated, he was clearly affected. After using the taser, Lopera went on to hand strikes. The video confirms, and the police department agrees, that Lopera was in a dominant position over Tashii as he was being held face down on the ground. Lopera hit him 10 to 12 times while screaming at him. After hitting Tashii, Lopera went on to a chokehold. Again, as I mentioned, numerous other departments that were surveyed by Metro after this case, 2/3 of them don't allow any kinds of chokeholds, but Metro, the police department here, does allow chokeholds. They train its officers that a neck restraint should be effective within 4 to 10 seconds. They train its officers that the use of a chokehold should cause a subject to pass out after 4 to 7 seconds. Even with minimal compression, a person become unconscious, and that's what happened to Tashii. Yet, according to video surveillance, Tashii was held for 1 minute and 12 seconds. Lopera had full encirclement and proper compression. The intervening officers who really didn't intervene sat there for 48 seconds and did not physically remove Ken Lopera from Tashii Farmer. After the incident, an enormous amount of press was generated by this case because it happened on the Strip and because Las Vegas has had a major problem with the police department killing its citizens. In fact, African Americans are disproportionately affected by police use of force, as been documented by the Justice Department of the United States, as well as by the Las Vegas Review-Journal. After the incident, the police department fired Lopera and recommended that he be charged with the crime. He was charged with involuntary manslaughter and oppression under the color of office. But instead of having a public preliminary hearing on the charges, the district attorney held a secretive and closed grand jury on the charges. During that grand jury, the DA allowed experts to testify who had never once testified against a police officer. Those so-called experts stated that they could not tell what caused Tashii Farmer to die, even though the coroner in the videotape clearly shows that he was choked to death. Predictably, the grand jury did not indict Lopera. These criminal charges generated significant media attention, and I'll just show a 1-minute video demonstrating the national coverage that occurred on this case.
Officer Lopera will be charged with involuntary manslaughter and oppression under the color of office.
Are you seeing
Well, that
that?
was Nevada's Clark County Sheriff announcing criminal charges against.
Are you able to see the screen?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
Officer Lopera will be charged with involuntary manslaughter and oppression under the color of office.
Well, that was Nevada's Clark County Sheriff announcing criminal charges against a Las Vegas police officer following the release of a coroner's report concluding the death of an unarmed black man was homicide by asphyxiation. 31-year-old Officer Kenneth Lopera was released on $6,000 bail and pleaded not guilty to the charges. He's accused of using what is known as an unauthorized martial arts style chokehold on the victim, which blocks blood flow from the carotid artery to the brain. The autopsy also revealed that 40-year-old Tashii Farmer was high on methamphetamine and had an enlarged heart. He was a father of 2 who lived with his mother and was being treated for depression. LaPera's body camera captures the incident, which began at the Venetian Hotel coffee shop where Farmer approached the officer and his partner, telling them he was being followed. LaPera said he appeared sweaty and disoriented. A chase ensued. Once the officer caught up with him, he repeatedly shouted at the farmer to roll on his stomach and tased him 7 times, 4 times more than allowed of the department. The video shows Farmer reaching for his back, trying to remove the taser prongs. Hotel security cameras show police and Venetian security guards on the scene while LaPera punches Farmer in the face and neck. LaPera then puts Farmer in what is called the rear naked choke for a minute. After he was handcuffed, police noticed Farmer was not breathing and gave him CPR until paramedics arrived. He was pronounced dead at a hospital.
This is the 32-minute mark.
Thank you. All right. After the incident, after the case, the charges were dismissed against LaPera, no further action was taken by the district attorney. The district attorney had the opportunity to charge LaPera and bring a preliminary hearing in public, but chose not to do so. The other 3 officers who participated in holding Tashii Farmer down were not charged with any crimes and remain on the police department to this day. They did not receive any discipline for their role in the incident. I'm open to questions.
Commissioners Roberts and Mendes-France, do you have questions of this witness?
Yes, I have a question. We are looking at systemic failures and race, especially against the Afro-Americans. Attorney, if the Mr. Farmer were a white person, do you think the treatment, the approach by the police and the treatment would have been the same? What is your view on that?
I do not believe that. I think that he wouldn't have been placed in a chokehold. He wouldn't have been assaulted like that, and he wouldn't have been tased. I've said that frequently in prosecuting this case, that if it was a drunk white tourist from Iowa who was just stumbling around the Venetian, the most that would have happened is they probably would have taken him into security and given him a trespass. So I agree that I believe that it was implicit bias, and that's demonstrated by the statistics in Nevada over the past several decades.
The other thing that struck me was the impunity. How is it, given the low threshold to get one indicted, that in this case there was no indictment against LaPera?
So what happened with the grand jury was they allowed these experts to be brought in who are from an institute in the United States called the Force Institute. And it is an institute that is created by law enforcement, funded by law enforcement, that has so-called experts come in and testify in favor of law enforcement. So in this case, to remind you, the Clark County coroner, who was a public officer, ruled that it was asphyxiation. The video demonstrated it was asphyxiation, but they brought these experts in who said, well, he had some methamphetamine in his system and he had an enlarged heart. So we can't tell if it was the chokehold and the beating that killed him or not. And as you mentioned, probable cause is all that's required at the grand jury level. It's not beyond a reasonable doubt, which is required at the trial level. So even with that testimony, the grand jury declined to indict him. We met, my client and I, Trinita, met with the district attorney and practically begged him to bring a case in the public arena via preliminary hearing, because in a grand jury, it's not double jeopardy. If the grand jury declines to indict, you can still bring it before a judge who can then say that there is probable cause and send it to trial. But the district attorney, who clearly works with the police department every day in many cases, declined to bring that case, and the case was allowed to close.
Yeah. It's, may I, please? Attorney Lagomarsino, thank you for your testimony, and I would like to know why the Clark County coroner concluded it is the death, Tashii's death is an homicide, and then why the Clark County District Attorney did not take at the trial. What is your analysis about that?
The Clark, thank you for the question. The Clark County coroner performed an autopsy on Tashii Farmer. They examined him physically. They looked at his bruising all along his carotid artery. They looked at all the evidence of injury that he had and concluded that it was the restraint asphyxiation procedures that were the cause of death. So that on the one hand, that's the Clark County coroner and the video evidence and frankly logic that Tashii Farmer would not have spontaneously died at the Venetian that day had he not been placed in a chokehold. But the argument that has been made by many organizations, including the American Civil Liberties Union of Nevada, is that because the police work so closely with the district attorney, that there is a conflict of interest and that the police are given preferential treatment that would not otherwise be given to normal citizens who are not law enforcement. And we were, my client, Trinita, and I were both extremely upset that they chose not to bring a case at the preliminary hearing, but we were not surprised because it's been going on for many years, many decades. We used to have a process here called the coroner's inquest that went on from the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s and into the 2000s. And you're talking 40 to 50 years of coroner's inquests. And all the coroner's inquests involving officer-involved deaths, only one officer was ever found to be responsible because the district attorney puts on the case and they put on the case that they want to put on. And as a result, the police officers are exonerated.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. But I have seen on the Tashii's website, there is a website dedicated to Tashii, and I have seen the state provide funds for the family, accept to give funds for family.
Correct. So there were two lawsuits that were brought. One lawsuit was brought by Tashii's children, and his estate. That was not our case. That was a different attorney who handled that case. That case has since settled in the civil arena, and they paid monies to the family. The state did.
On which basis, please? Judicially speaking, on which basis it was done?
The case was brought for a violation of Tashii's civil rights.
Okay, yes, absolutely.
Specifically taking away his life under the 14th Amendment.
Okay, and related to this case on the civil rights of Tashii, does the district attorney, the county district attorney, did not think it was reasonable because there is a lot of proofs, even with the video camera. Tashii was not asphyxiated by himself, but by the police, by l'opera.
Correct. He is a different, although it's the district attorney does work for the state, it was a different entity that paid the money to settle the case.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to ask that because I am from another country. I'm from France, and it's not the system of it's not the same system of law. That's why I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I can tell you people that live in the United States and especially Las Vegas are extremely frustrated with the system, and it does not make sense that it should be that way.
Just if I may, just do you have a statistic on how many African American were killed in Las Vegas? Is there some statistic on that?
We do. So in 2010, after 50 years of killings by the police department, the Las Vegas newspaper, the Las Vegas Review-Journal, which is the biggest newspaper in Las Vegas, performed a very extensive very extensive journalism investigation where they compiled all the statistics and demonstrated that African Americans were disproportionately killed in relation to Caucasians or Hispanics in Las Vegas. And then as a result of that investigation, the United States Justice Department came in and did an investigation, and they entered into an agreement with the police department for more training and changes of policies. And there has been some improvement, I have to say, since 2010, but nowhere near the amount that is needed to get where we need to be.
Attorney, just one quick question. What client consider justice in this case? What measures, apart from compensation, monetary compensation?
The client, Trinita, wants Officer LaPera to be charged by the United States for violation of civil rights under a criminal.
What wish to see justice would have been done in this?
She wants to see LaPera punished and go to prison. That is her idea of justice.
Very good.
There are 7 minutes remaining in the hearing.
Yes. This has been consistent. That the victims, the families, they do not, it's not just a matter of money. They would like to see the end of impunity, and would like to see accountability on the part of the police when these things happen. Now, if what measures do you would recommend in terms of training and recruiting that would allow for a more equal treatment of Afro-Americans by the police?
I think number one, there has to be a recognition of the need for the training. Sometime when the Justice Department came in and told the police department that they have problems with race and problems with discrimination, the police department came in and said, okay, we will train for that. But then the instructors were making jokes about the training for discrimination, which was documented. So they had to fix that. But in terms of training, you have to look at not just explicit bias, but implicit bias, cultural training. You have to have officers have proper background checks, better psychological evaluations. But most importantly, you need punishment. If an officer, like such as the 3 officers who were involved, can hold somebody down for 48 seconds while somebody else is being choked to death and they receive no punishment, that is a terrible example that no amount of training can undo. And it takes guts on behalf of the executives to remove those types of officers. So that to me is the biggest issue. The officers in Las Vegas are paid very, very well. And the retirement system that we have here after they work for 25 or 30 years is very lucrative And if they were punished by having that taken away from them, that would be the benefit to everyone if you have wrongdoers involved.
Could we, after what you said, could we see impunity will still be there as a issue of race is not tackled or work on? There is no work really on the racialization of people of African descent.
I'm sorry, can you please repeat the question?
Is there a relation between impunity, the level of impunity, and the level of racialization in US?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay.
I think the less punishment, the more impunity. And even with the recent riots in the Capitol, which were publicized, which are not race related to African Americans, I think they have to show that people who act poorly need to be prosecuted, and that will deter future bad behavior. And that's really the only way, in my belief, in addition to training, that this problem can be addressed. And not just death cases. In any case where there's an abuse of power. You know, we've had cases where people are just walking down the street and they're detained for no reason that we've personally handled. And I had one case where somebody said, "You look like a rapper." I mean, the person was not drunk, had no drugs, no weapons, no record, was simply going to meet his family, and they just detained people on the Strip. The Strip is the Las Vegas Boulevard where all the hotels are. So it needs to be an everyday situation and everyday training with the officers.
Is there something to see with the fact that the US is not signatory of international law, like human rights law or fundamental rights, etc., etc. And do you think they apply the law they want, the law they prefer, national law, than to take in consideration the hierarchy of laws, the norms, imperative norm, for example, for the right to life?
Right. I think to answer your question, with the amount of division in the United States between political party, sometimes even, that it's hard to have one policy if you have one president who is saying, go ahead and rough everybody up on camera, and then another president who before him is emphasizing accountability and for race. And so I think there has to be more of a consistent policy from the United States to recognize that there are simple basic human rights that need to be respected.
Thank you.
This concludes the hearing in the case of Tashii Farmer. The hearing in the case of Tarika Wilson will start at the top of the hour. Thank you, Mr. Lagomarsino.
Thank you. Thank you for your time today. Thank you.